This is the process shot. I'm Michael. I'm stuck in a haunted movie theater, and I've seen a lot of trash cinema in my time. This year has been no different, and so I'd like to waste some time talking down on some of the worst of the movies I've seen that came out over this past year. I did the math, and I have 11 of them to share, which may be a weird number, but I'm sticking with it. Again, these movies are limited to those that I've seen in the past year. It's entirely possible that another movie belongs on this list, but if I never saw it, then it's like it never actually existed. But if you want to complain about something else you've seen this year, feel free to leave a comment. Anyways, let's get this over with. First up at number 11 is Goodnight Mommy from director Matt Sobel. This psychological horror film is a slow burn that doesn't go anywhere, no matter how much it tries to suggest otherwise. It's really a bit more frustrating than it is spooky, with characters you are never given reasons to care about, and that you would much rather see get knocked off or at least incapacitated. When the final twists do come around, it's less of a surprise and more of a relief that the movie is coming to an end. Though the way that it does end is just as likely to leave you with the same bitterness as everything before that. Number 10 is A Perfect Pairing, directed by Stuart McDonald. This romantic comedy isn't necessarily a completely awful movie, but it certainly isn't trying at all to be good or even decent. It's very much by the numbers, adhering to its formula so closely that you can likely predict what is about to occur in a scene the moment that the film cuts to a new location. It doesn't help that nobody seems to be trying to offer anything to add to these cliches and tropes, likely because they don't want to lose out on their paid vacation to Australia. At number 9 is Senior Year from Alex Hardcastle. This is one of those comedy films which is not only rather unfunny on a more objective level, but on a structural level as well. It's driven almost entirely by two concepts. The lead actress is a chubby cheerleader, and a whole lot of references to the 1990s. Coupled with its unremarkable supporting cast, a plot structure so weak that it can barely support itself, and a production that's as financially basic as the film's premise is. The only thing that keeps this movie from ranking any higher on my list is, well, I've managed to find worse movies. One of those worse movies, the 8th worst in my opinion, was Me Time, directed by John Hamburg. This is also an unfunny comedy movie, marked less by anything to do with the story or production, and more to do with how forgettable it all becomes when the day is through. There's nothing in the movie that sticks out in memory, despite the mismatched lead actors, their wacky antics, the seemingly random locations, or, well, anything. If there is anything to be remembered, it's likely only the case because it's a generic trope found in any other movie, most of which are probably better. Number 7 on the list is Home Team from Charles and Daniel Kinnane. I do happen to remember more about this film than Me Time, but mostly because it's a case of laziness in the writer's room. The movie is based on a true story, but instead of actually sticking close to that reality and writing an original story around real-life figures, it seems as if they went the other direction by using an old screenplay lying around, replacing character names, and writing in new details whenever necessary. The end result is plagued by generic characters, poor attempts at humor, predictable outcomes, and absolutely nothing that even implies that any of this was necessary, no matter how much costs were cut by the product placement. Speaking of unnecessary, coming in at number 6 is The Royal Treatment from Rick Jacobson. Much like A Perfect Pairing, it's a romantic comedy that follows a generic outline and paper-thin characters with the personalities of a block of wood and the development of, laundry lint, I suppose. The thing that makes this movie stand out is its leading couple, or rather, their performances, one of which is so bland and unremarkable that he could have been replaced by any inanimate object and still get the general idea across. And the other is putting on a terrible accent for seemingly no reason other than because her character is from New York. Anything more that could be said about this film would be redundant, because they'd all conclude that someone or something is annoying or unlikable. At number 5 on this list is Grimcutty, directed by John William Ross. It's a horror film inspired by true events, which in itself is already a bad sign. The movie isn't exactly helped by its plotting, which is dependent on characters never actually sitting down to have a real discussion and instead jumping straight to conclusions, which on one hand is the message of the story, but on the other hand just frustrates you and makes you hope the monster is real and will come to put you out of your misery. It's actually almost comical how much the story depends on characters making the worst decisions at the worst time, but overall it's just a dumb movie trying to capitalize on a trend that had died well before the film was even greenlit. Number 4 is Choose or Die, from director Toby Meakins. This is also a horror movie that is designed around making bad decisions, but in this case, the film's major flaw is in its missed potential. There are flashes of reasonably decent ideas throughout the film, but only just so, before they're squandered on the usual horror staples you could have seen in any other movie. All of this comes with a final message out of nowhere about nostalgia and old technologies, which ends up going completely against the reasons that the lead characters had started this whole ordeal in the first place, making everything else about the film about as pointless as it had already been when it began. In third place, we've got Cheaper by the Dozen, from Gail Lerner. It may not be the worst movie of the year, but it's certainly the least necessary of the bunch. Just about every minute of this film seems like it was made to hold on to the film rights for the story without a care for any actual cinematic art, or at least an indication of effort. The poor attempts that we do get at trying to expand upon the generic story and subplots with thematic substance are extremely basic and oversimplified, to the point that they may as well not have been attempted if the filmmakers knew our intelligence would be insulted. At the very least, this is not the movie for those complicated sorts of topics to be examined. The second worst movie of the year, and coincidentally the first new movie I had seen this year, was Brazen, directed by Monika Mitchell. It's a romantic thriller with little romance and fewer thrills, and somehow it has even less to show for itself in its production values and actual visual makeup. I honestly think this may have been the cheapest film I've seen all year, though this hardly absolves it of its many other flaws, most of which tend to either surround the lead characters, whose acting skills are about as flat as the set pieces, or the story itself, which is so uninspired and bland that anything worth talking about likely comes from laughing about how little sense it makes. Finally, the worst film of the year by far was Judd Apatow's The Bubble, which tries so hard to be a timely comedy about lockdown panic and modern film production, but fails to really be about either of these. Instead, it's a series of unfunny jokes told by actors and actresses who are barely trying to perform, likely working from a script that was either written the day of the shoot or told everybody to improvise. Stories come and go with no reason for existing in the first place. Literal dance breaks occur twice. Characters will do and say whatever they want because they can, with no regard to their established personalities. And it isn't until the last 15 minutes that the movie remembers that it has to wrap things up, using this time to actually do stuff that might be considered story development. If the film had anything in its favor, it's that people were hopefully paid some good money before the rest of the budget was pocketed for, I don't know. The point I'm trying to get across is that this movie has no point, not only in that it fails to make any points about the topics it tries to satirize, but also in that if this film never existed, nothing about our timeline would change because of its absence. And that brings this list video to an end. If you liked it, leave a like. If you have something to add, leave a comment. As always, subscribe to the channel for more reviews. I mean, more lists. No, it's still pretty much just reviews that I make around here.